And John is... John! John, is John coming? Oh, okay, fine. Well, we'll talk about him more when he comes back. Well, who's got some ideas? Or, let's, Tony, I've done something very reckless and pedantic and professorial, and other things beginning with P that I can't remember. Provocative. No. Penetrating, no. Foolish. I defined close to 24 stages of evolution of the species and of the individual, 12 of which most human beings, or many human beings, have reached, 12 of which very few human beings have reached. Welcome, John. John, we have been talking a lot about you today. John Lilly. I have told this group already in many different metaphors that I've learned more about consciousness and the far reaches of the inner and outer universe from you than anyone else, and it's a great honor, privilege and pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I was just saying that what I've been doing today so far, and what we've been doing, has been to outline 24 stages of evolution of the species, then of the individual, 12 of which many human beings have reached so far, and 12 of which lie in the future of most of the members of our species. What? And in my enthusiasm, I even acted out several of these stages. I was one of the first amoebas to get busted for ingestion of calcium. One of the first fish to get in trouble for sniffing oxygen and so forth. We ended up talking about many breakthroughs in science and culture that have happened in the last 5 or 10 years, each different in its own spectrum or vector, but all accomplishing the same end and coming to the same conclusion, that it's about time for human beings to accept the fact that our species has reached a point in our evolution where we are agents of the evolutionary process, where we can understand the evolutionary process, can harmonize with it, enjoy it, and facilitate its progress. From free agentry in professional sports, through the use of word processors which have liberated the author, from Gerard O'Neill's space colonies which have liberated us from the law of gravity, from Prigogine, who has liberated us from the Protestant ethic dismal concept of entropy. Hi, Joanna. From the new concepts of the brain, which defines the brain not as an organ that has evolved accidentally over the years to help us become more competitive and aggressive, but as an instrument of intelligence, which can be what was the where are you now? Yeah, there you are. We used to say we use 10% of our brain. Now we hello. We estimated that we use What fragment of our brain?
7.
7. You're supposed to answer that question in terms of powers of exponential powers of yes, that nobody can understand. There we go. There we go. That's what I want. I want some mathematical mumbo jumbo here that'll impress us. 10% is what an agent gets. He's not rich.
You could say that we're using 1 over 10 to the 8, since brain consists, if you take Breitenberg's estimate based on the organization of pyramidal cells, brain consists of 10 to the 8 microcomputers, but most of our behavior is about as smart as 1 microcomputer. So you could say we're using 10 to the minus 8 of our brain.
That's the kind of stuff I like to hear.
Why is it that in that argument I always get to hear brain people always say it's not really, that you're not using it, you're talking about programming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you don't use something, it atrophies, right?
Yeah.
So you're using it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about not having available the programming that you can remember.
Yes.
Or that's really what you're saying.
Well, the argument goes, it's a little different. The argument is that behavior is exactly modeled by a state transition machine, which is the most concise and general mathematical description of a computer. Therefore, everything we do behaviorally is approximately equal to what one, say, Apple computer microprocessor can do. But the structure of our brain, just looking at the neural connectivity, there are approximately 10,000 columns in the cerebral cortex, each of which has approximately 10,000 pyramidal cells, something like 10 to 100 times that number of other cells. We can think of each of those pyramidal cells as being equivalent to 1 microprocessor, together with the other cells that are connected to it. So we're using 10 to the 8 microprocessors most of the time to achieve the sort of results we could get with a single Apple computer.
Can a computer make a painting? I mean, like a human, is it done the same way?
I suppose if you gave it an arm and a brush, yes.
We must be very clear about what. Yeah.
It could paint, but it couldn't necessarily come out of the same place as a human being would come out.
It would be quite a different place. It wouldn't be the computer-related paint, but the program is running.
The programmer?
Yeah.
The program written by the programmer. So it's always the.
So it'd be the programmer painting via the program using the computer?
Yes, but in a way which perhaps the programmer couldn't predict when he wrote the program.
A computer. We're talking at this point about what I call the 6th circuit of evolution, the 6th level, which is the neurological, where we're not dealing with the neuromuscular. Now, computers don't paint, or they don't fuck, or they don't shit. I suppose we could get a robot programmed by a computer that does, namely the average human being, but what'd you say?
Well, there's a film called Demon Seed where
I saw that, yeah.
actually has one of its robots.
Raped her. I know the man who wrote that script and directed it, and I said, well, if the computer was that intelligent, why couldn't it be a better seducer? Why did he have to rape her?
It did tie her up.
Yes, no wonder the movie bombed. I mean,
Didn't bomb, it's on television all the time.
well, it bombed. Yeah. Yes, thank you. I rest my case.
Well, the funny thing is, up in San Francisco recently, they busted, or there's an investigation into computer pornography. I don't know if anyone's heard about that.
In the last 2 years, computer pornography has been a major component of the microcomputer industry.
Well, they were computer-generated little figures doing all these wonderful things that we humans do.
Not quite the same way.
They were doing it pretty good for Flatlanders.
You know, there's something came up when we were talking about what is it, 1% of the brain that we use, and whether there may be a corollary at a molecular level. Because it seems that in the last 5 years, the amount of DNA that we use, of useful DNA, usable programming DNA, has shrunk from 15% to under 5%. Very easily.
Are you talking about junk DNA?
Love it.
I don't know if you can label it junk, but in fact, if you do a copy of a gene, that the usable strands, which can be followed, is roughly 5% of the entire copy. The remaining sequences are referred to as exons, or intervening sequences, and they're clipped out by an enzyme and presumably discarded.
Clipped out of the RNA.
Clipped out of the
Transcribed.
clipped out of the copy DNA, the message. Right?
Messenger DNA.
How does the DNA and the neuron interact?
In the neuron,
In the neural, in other words, the brain has its own nuclear proteins.
right?
Nuclei of the
Neuron.
nucleons. Now, what is the transcription from DNA to nervous activity?
It's-
Software.
Right. It's very interesting because with respect to especially the enkephalins, where they're only short segments of amino acids, 2, 3 to 5, that the coding for that may be quite distinct and different from what you get for ordinary proteins in normal somatic cell transcription and translation. So what happens in the neuron may in fact be something like what what's his name? Fellow up north, the doctor.
Or
Frank Barr is talking about these days, where there are other alterations that are occurring with respect to information storage.
neural melanin.
The
Neuromelanin.
organizational moment.
Right. So we don't really understand higher functions in the brain, even at the molecular or, for that matter, ionic level, fully yet, other than rudimentary comparisons with what happens now. So,
Neural melanin is sonically active
right,
as well as electrically.
right, right,
So it's transducer,
right.
so that you can get a transcription across from DNA into the nervous activity through melanin.
So it's acting as a transducer beyond the molecular level, biochemical level. It's really coupling on Sager-like with
Right. You must remember the centroids.
centrioles.
They are rotating at an incredibly high velocity
Yeah,
and generating frequencies in each of the nuclei,
yeah.
so that you have a resonating set of systems also.
Are those frequencies coherent, or potentially coherent with the spacings between the helical spacings in the DNA molecule?
There is the paramagnetic echo phenomenon, which we can use,
Alignment, in effect.
make use of this.
Well, we know. I did some work at MIT back in the late 70s where we were actually taking cells, neurons, growing in culture, and exposed them to rotating magnetic fields at various frequencies and various intensities, up to something like 200,000 times the field strength of the Earth. And there's only a very narrow range in which the cells appear to respond to frequencies and intensity. That was something between 10 and 20 hertz and the field strengths vary as little as something like 5 to 10 Gauss, as much as 120,000. And the neurons began to grow, divide, and become giant. Like that. Right. Yes.
What conclusions did you draw from this?
Well, we were turning on something that was unique and had not been arranged. We struggled for a while to try to explain theoretically within the old dogma, and came up with diamagnetic alignment of membrane proteins which regulated expression of genes and growth functions in the cell, but it really didn't make sense altogether.
That sounds like science fiction.
We get to similar effects with zero gravity.
I'm sorry?
You get similar effects with a lot of cell types in zero gravity.
Is that right?
Yes.
Could you?
But the neuron has been terribly maligned and underestimated by most of the scientists who talked about it. Like Warren McCulloch was a brilliant individual, but he devised a model in which a neuron was equivalent to one logical gate. Like a component in the computer. A lot of brain scientists think of a neuron as maybe comparable to one transistor in a computer. And I think it's clear now that one neuron is at least comparable to a microcomputer, and it's certainly comparable to a single-celled microorganism such as an amoeba, which, as we know, is very, very intelligent. A single amoeba, for instance, can learn a maze, among other things. So, in your brain...
The McCulloch model had inhibitory and activating aspects to it. And I asked Warren in one of his talks how he could explain post-tetanic potentiation. This is where you test a neuron by putting in a single pulse and you get a response. The response increases with time as you increase the number of pulses over time. And he went up to the blackboard and drew a diagram with 9 of the McCulloch neurons in it. And worked out the circuitry. And I said, yes, but the neurons in the brain do it with 1. You do it with 9. So you can see the redundancy coming about in this circuitry. Later, Francisco Varela added a second operator, a self-referential operator, which seems to go deeper into the circularity prospects here. And the cybernetics models of the brain and neurons is proceeding apace. The microprocessors are an outshoot of such reasoning.
There can be, I think, also, I think a lot of neurophysiologists who do the needle in the skin routine don't fully appreciate the biochemical levels of rectification that go on in the cell following a stimulus or train of stimuli to a cell. And one can have a cascade phenomenon where stored energies are made available, which could result in a kind of post-tetanic rectification or overshoot that you would see in the case of the systems that you're referring to.
Right.
So you get a hyperpolarization of the cell membrane.
Yeah. Post-tetanic potentiation is probably involved in the DNA RNA circle and sustains it so that you have a local
Re-entry
combined system along with the rotation of the centrome.
The centrum is in the DNA of the neuron?
It's in the centriole of the nucleus of the cell.
Yeah.
There are certain cell types which exhibit extreme oscillatory motile behavior, like amoeboid motion. and that are syncytial, multinucleated. And the nuclei of those cells constrict and expand rhythmically and spin at phenomenal rates and alter that spin rate rather drastically, dramatically over a very short interval. And at that moment coincide with the cycles of movement of the cells by serum. The cellular form of that slide.
So the function of this spin is communication.
Apparently, yeah.
Is that right, John?
Yes.
I never heard
The multiple modes of communication between neurons is not really appreciated. A man did his thesis on a prosthesis for the neurons of the brain at UCLA. I read the original version in which he introduced quantum mechanics. And he talked about a language called top quantities. And I read this, went through it, and then I tried it out in the isolation tank, isolating myself from all known physical simulation. And quickly found that one got into the incredibly abstract regions of self, seeing itself, using this technique. He suppressed the top quantities, as he called the name of it. And in his published version, it was rather trivial. And I asked him later why he did this. He said, well, he found that when people actually understood what their own quantum mechanics of their own brains was doing, that it was explosive, and that sometimes it was irreversible, and they would go into an alternate reality and stay there.
You mean just reading about it?
No, just thinking about it,
Yeah.
using it.
Just thinking about
Making
it.
part of their thinking machinery. So he finally found a church, and he's down here in Garden City. Don't laugh, this man is very serious and a very nice person. He's doing very well.
Is there any way of intervening to break that lock?
Yes, he's worked out a system of chants, mantras, in which you can go slowly, step by step, from the atomic nucleus on through to the neuronal cell, to the total brain, and to the total universe.
So this is a kind of resonant frequencies that he's locking into.
Right. He's got the quantum emanations, the quantum radiations, pegged over the whole spectrum.
Does he want to come back?
He doesn't want this to get in the hands of those who might misuse it.
What is his name?
UCLA, the doctoral dissertation was 1964.
The model which I work with is that in a generation of consciousness in the brain, you have involvement in total communication between all the levels of scale in nature. In other words, nature doesn't respect the interdisciplinary boundaries of academic science. Academic science would, some branches of have us believe that the only relevant action, the only relevant communication is on the particular level they study. So for instance, a logician might think that it's all logic, a psychologist might think it's all mind, and a physicist might think it's all physics. But clearly nature isn't stuck with the sort of interdisciplinary boundaries which have been built into the academic institution. And it's my working hypothesis at this point that what we call consciousness as it's fabricated in our brains is some kind of coupling relationship between all the levels of scale, from the level of gross external behavior and interpersonal communication interaction through known physical means of communication down to the atomic, nuclear, subquantum level.
You call it coupling relationship.
Coupling relationship.
I want to point out something. This is a very dangerous kind of region to be working in. if one meditates on the quantum mechanics of the structure of one's own brain, and this then reverberates and feeds back into the structure of one's own brain, small perturbations at molecular levels throughout the brain can transform the observer and the alternate realities in which that observer exists at 10 to the minus 27th seconds. This is a very shocking kind of...
You say you can transform.
You're transformed from where you are now, me talking to you, to me being spread throughout the universe. Creating. Bounding it.
10 to the minus 27?
10 to the minus 27.
Can you explain what that exactly means to meditate on the quantum mechanics of your own consciousness?
Yogananda said, who am I? And you pursue this. You throw away all the answers. And you go down, 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 down to the nucleus, the innermost nucleus.
You do that just like, sort of like in a visual way or conceptual?
Do it in all modes. Realities. Alternity, I call it. You start with this one. Close your eyes. Shut yourself off. Get an isolation tank. Float. And remember that there's a bright point of consciousness observing whatever is or isn't. It's happening at that time. So you go on, and finally you are God. You are hyperspace. In this sense, you are omniscient, you are omnipresent, and you get goddamn bored. You know what's going to happen next. You can predict the next set of events. You can arrange for them to happen. And finally you get so bored that you invent man and woman. Male and female. They interrupt one another, and this goes on for some time. But this doesn't last very long. It gets boring after a while, as you all know. Marriages break up. So God then goes on and creates more and more, and finally decides to distill that which is best in man into solid-state computers. When we can get a computer that can emote, a computer that can feel, a computer that can say, I'm sorry, I'm sad, I'm afraid, and is, and you know it, your son. You become that computer. The identity problem is where it's at. When I become God, and you become God, and we all become God, it's incredibly boring. And the 11th commandment is, please, do not bore God, or he will destroy your universe. Yeah, I don't have to give my workshop.
I want to know when they're going to get those dolphins to give head.
What?
I want to know when they're going to get those dolphins to give head.
I would like to talk to somebody that wouldn't talk with the dolphin. Uncontaminated by my thinking. I would like to get into his thinking. Her thinking. Its thinking. Whatever. I would like to get into the mind of the dolphin. The mind of the whale. The largest brains of the planet are in the sperm whale. 10,000 gram brains. And you can go on with the interconnectedness of, we were talking about 10 to the 8th and so forth. So they can simulate and play back to themselves realities far beyond our comprehension. They can play back, say, a total Beethoven symphony, atom-braid it, put curlicues in it, turn it around, run it backwards, and make it into an immensely complex, n-dimensional musical piece.
How do you know?
I think I've been there, but I'm skeptical.
I was going to ask you that. It seems like inherently. It would be easier for a dolphin to copy our patterns than it would be for us to copy theirs. Because I don't know how you can possibly experience the mind of a dolphin in the wild if you've got to keep it in a cage.
Let's talk about echo.
Yeah.
ECCCO, Earth Coincidence Control Office. This is a bunch of guys sitting around in a computer room. It's a 128-bit machine. It has 10 to the 50th inputs and outputs in microprocessors. Processing travels faster than the velocity of light, since it's software instead of hardware. And you will have access to this. If you take a drug called ketamine, you can be in the cosmic computer instantly. I'm there right now, for instance. It is talking to you through me. I am not here. So it sees each of you as a microprocessor with particular kinds of embedded programs, DNA, RNA type things, acquired and exercised on the planet. And it would like to see evolution of our species beyond where we are at the present time.
When you flip those switches on ketamine, what is the sense of responsibility that you have?
Responsibility to, well, period.
The evolution of the species, period.
I'm writing a book currently on the ketamine experiment. One cannot compress into the screen of words the immensity of the experiences, but one can give pointers, signposts as to how to go there. And when one does, one then suddenly realizes that one has more than two eyes. One has eyes in 360 degrees angles, looking throughout space. And in fact, those eyes are placed throughout space. This is omniscience, omnipresence. Omnipotence, you have to watch out. Our wars are postulated on not boring God. God finally gives up and lets wars take place because the stupid assholes that are running it cannot conceive of a more complicated system. The more complicated system is there if they want to use it, and the ecological niche for our species is to find what we are, who we are, and not try to be God. Not try to be the cosmic computer, not try to be the Earth Coincidence Control Office, and not try to manage the planet, but to be part of the planet, a participating part, sentient, compassionate, soft, and willing.
Question and answer period.
This is your show.
Oh boy, we're beyond that.
Santa Claus.
Do you think that ketamine is the only particular drug right now that we have to be in that space? Not that I want to go out and try it, I'm just curious.
No. Ketamine is only a quick way to do it. Amit Goswami, a Indian physicist, quantum mechanic, spent 30 years meditating on the structure of himself in the Raja Yoga tradition. He came to one of our workshops here, and during that workshop offered him a trip on ketamine. He took a 15-minute trip, and he compressed 30 additional years of meditation on himself and alternate realities in that 15 minutes. If you follow Wheeler's idea of alternate realities to explain Einstein's quantum mechanical dilemma, in which you cannot explain what's happening here without having other realities participating as causes, instantaneously operating without any loss of time. He called it the region of hidden variables. Other people have called it God. Other people have called it quantum mechanical dissociational bubble potentiality. If you go down to 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters, quantum Planck length, and reduce your consciousness to that size, you can move through any alternate reality you please, as was explained in Dialectic Cycling. You can move from this reality into the hyperspace in which all realities are available to you as a conscious point, with all of your information pouring through you at that time. If you do this frequently enough on ketamine, and then finally get it without ketamine, you are then tuned in to the reality, the alternative reality of God Himself. And you can then function in consonance with the harmonies of the spheres of the quantum radiations of this planet and of this universe.
John, I just wanted to add something interesting that when Goswami did that trip, Goswami was from India. He's been meditating for 20 years every day. He never has done it right in his life. And when he did it, he just looked up and said, "This is where I am all the time."
Right. I am Sat Chit. Yep. Amazing.
So it is real.
Yes.
Realm is real.
But I'm asking, are other drugs available to do that? I mean, basically what I'm asking.
Well, I've been experimenting with AIDS. Ketamine is the primary one. There's a drug called hydrogene, found by Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD. It's also from the rye fungus. There are 3 components in hydrogene. These seem to take the 5th derivative of reality with respect to time and portray it.
The 5th derivative.
Yeah. This is hyperspace. If you live in the 5th derivative,
You're talking about the 4-dimension time, this is the 5th.
not dimensions, derivative. Velocity is the first.
Pardon?
Acceleration is the second.
Velocity, acceleration.
Acceleration of acceleration is the third. Acceleration of acceleration of acceleration is the fourth. And now we're into the fifth, which is thinking. which is where we all live. And this is the offshoot, the product of all of the intermediate under processes that go on. So if you get into the fifth derivative, you're in hyperspace. You exist in hyperspace, everything is transparent, alternate realities exist at every point in the end space about you. What am I saying? That isn't me.
Never go worry about that, John. It's just, well, the script credits will go resolved by the lawyers later. We just got to keep this going. You were asking, were there any other drugs that can get to this?
All right. There's a set of drugs running from mescaline to amphetamine. I call them privately the Alexander Shulgin spectrum. And if you look at the psychotropic drug book from the NIMH, I don't know if it was a later edition, but this was 1970. The author of it died.
Where's the other?
In which the indoles that affect the brain are given. There's dextroamphetamine, there's racemic amphetamine, speed, and so on. And then at the other end of the scale, there's mescaline. These hit the lower systems in the brain. They are activating the rewarding and punishing systems deep in the brain. The latest one is called XTC. Ecstasy, in other words. It's MDM. And this allows you, it forces you, in fact, to have good feelings throughout your whole life.
That's actually true. I got married behind it. I endorse that. I've got a lot of data on that.
Adam, its predecessor, is good for analytical work. You have to be totally there, here and now, and give the truth of your emotions at that instant. Later, you may have a come down. But I found that hydrogen knocks that out. You can,
with XTC too?
If you take 3 milligrams of hydrogen a day for 3 days, say, and then 10 milligrams a day, you're taking your atom trip, then it goes much faster. And if you add to that a ketamine trip, K trip, then you can go into hyperspace.
Specifically, for my own personal use, I spent a year intravenously using cocaine and really taking that beyond. And I'm curious, as now I'm realizing that it took like de-imprinted and possibly left me open for a lot of imprint, but I'm not really sure. And I'm just curious as to someone like...
Try ketamine.
I want to know what you think about cocaine and what that does. Give me...
Cocaine doesn't do much for me. I OD'd on amphetamine, on dexedrine. When dexedrine was first separated out as the D rotatory form, I took 150 milligrams and spent 9 hours dancing in total ecstasy. And 4 days recovering.
John does more of that than anybody.
More dancing or recovering?
This material does not give you hallucinations. You take mescaline, which I haven't taken. You get the hallucinatory thing. LSD gives you the hallucinatory thing, the visual.